What's up guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Greg. I'm working here with Mitchell again today, and we're back on the good old Mark IV Jetta here. Nothing super crazy. It's brake service time again, so while we're doing that, we're doing a couple other little things. One of those is, instead of just cleaning all the brake parts and putting them back on, I'm actually putting drilled and slotted rotors on, which if I can grab the other one here, I can quickly show. Maybe. It's probably in its own box, which is still sealed. Yes, so we'll get to that in a little bit. But the bigger thing, and why I'm doing this now as opposed to perhaps later in the fall, is a little while ago the car started making a kind of a rumbling noise in the back end. And so I started checking the back wheels for bearing play, see if there's any movement in them, and there hasn't been anything so far. But then last time I left my school apartment, just before I left, I jacked up each side and just gave it a spin, and just huge rumble bearing noise. I don't know if I can make this one do it. And it's hard to tell. I can try this. This is probably gonna be too much, but there is some brake scrubbing sound, but for the most part, there's an overall droning noise that's coming from the bearing. The other one we did already to make sure everything was going to go smoothly, and the bearing didn't look bad inside, but definitely very noisy. Both of them were the same. A little bit weird to have both gone at the same time, but I'm okay with that. Get them all out of the way at once. The other reason why this is a bigger job than it would normally be is because of the splash shields that are supposed to go behind the rotor. Like that behind. This car didn't have any left because they rot right around there and you lose the whole outer part. And the biggest thing is you can't put new ones of these on unless you pull the bearing, and pulling the bearing destroys the bearing, as we'll see in a little bit. So it's kind of a bigger job than it needs to be. Most people don't put new splash shields on, but it does help with keeping the brakes and rotors and whatnot clean from like road dirt. So I think that's about it for now. We're gonna tear into this side and go through how to do a rear bearing. All right, so first thing to get into this next job is to remove the brakes that are on here. As you can probably see, these rotors are fairly crusty anyways. That's partly why we're replacing them. So we're gonna remove the caliper and the brake pads and the rotor, and potentially the caliper carrier. We tried on the other side, but the bolts didn't want to undo, so we just said forget it and cleaned it as it was. So we'll do that much, and then we'll do a little more explanation on getting the bearing apart. Yeah, as far as the brake servicing goes, because we're not going to show much on that in this video, there is at least one video, if not two, on the channel already from when we did brakes on this car before it went on the road. So if you're looking for brake servicing, what we usually do for that, go check out that video, and Mitchell might be able to post a link for that at the top of the video. Alright, so we apologize for the rain noise in the steel building here, of course, but we've got all the brakes off and out of the way now, so it's actually time to remove the old bearing, which is the entire hub. There's a tin kind of dust cap that you have to work out evenly so that you don't bend it. If you go too far on one side, it deforms it and then it won't seal and it could fall out later on. And then there's a 30 millimeter 12-point axle nut, same as is on the front wheel bearings on these things. You remove that with the impact gun, and then you need a 3-jaw puller. You need 3-jaw puller, something like this, fairly big one, and you hook it around the hub and put the point of the thread in the center drilled part of the actual spindle. And then you should be able to just use a wrench. I believe it's 18 millimeter for this puller at least, but every puller is a little different. I lied, it's 19. But yeah, every puller is different, doesn't matter for that part, but usually a combination wrench is all it takes. It's very easy to remove the hub. And what you're gonna do most times is leave behind the inner race of the inner wheel bearing and the seal, of course. And so that's where the problem comes in, and I can't reach it right now, but you'll see when I go to use it. Some of the inner races, the manufacturers were smart and they put a machined groove in the inner part of the race that you can put one of those bearing separator pullers around, tighten it up a little bit, and then use the bearing puller to then pull that race off the shaft. Okay, so that's never happened before. That not only was the hub really loose when I took the nut off, which the other side was not very loose, I didn't even get the puller snugged up and I was ready to use the wrench to tighten it and it moved. So then I took the puller away and I just grabbed the hub, as you saw, and just pulled it off. And the inner race and the seal all came with it. I've never had that happen before. So that does not help illustrate this point. So normally you'd set up the puller like I was doing there, and then you'd use the wrench, and it wouldn't be very hard. You'd pull the hub right off, make sure you have your hand under it so it doesn't hit the floor. But this inner race would be left either right up at the base of the spindle or maybe a little bit out. When I did the other side, it started to move and then it ripped the hub off the race. And then on this one, where the camera is here, so there's a groove on these ones. Whoever made this bearing was smart. There's a groove just inside the outer lip here, and that's where you hook the bearing separator. And actually I should show that now since we're not going to get to use it. Okay, so it's hard to tell what this actually looks like. It's 3 pieces. This is one piece, the 2 pins and the puller bar, and then there's actually the thread to actually do the pulling. So this is what they call a bearing separator. It's basically meant for this job, but what you do once you've got the hub out of the way is these have sharp edges on the bearing separator. So you would, if I can make it work here, you'd hook those edges in that groove I was talking about on the inner race. Just snug those a little bit. You don't have to go crazy or you might break the edges of the puller. Put the pins in and the bar across and the actual pulling pin, and then it should be just as easy, if not easier, than pulling the hub off to get this race off of the spindle. We've done a lot of these bearings now, and that just happened has never happened before. So if you get lucky and that's the way it goes, great, easier, less work. But most times the inner race is right at the bottom still, and there's some of these that don't have a groove to put the bearing separator in. So then if you've got one of those, you have to take a small die grinder with a little 1-inch cutting disc and cut a little groove on each side to be able to hook the bearing puller in. Or if you can come up with another way, great, but you don't want to destroy or scratch the spindle that is running inside of these races. All right, so now with the hub and the bearing and everything out of the way, the most challenging part of this job, if you want to do it, is putting a new splash shield on here that is supposed to protect, why does that not fit? Maybe it's bent. But anyways, to protect the rotor from road dirt. So that's what's supposed to be there. And all that's left is some bits of shale and little washers under each of the bolt heads for the spindle. Now, I don't know how they do it in the shops. Maybe they just whip all 4 bolts out, take the spindle off, whack it with a hammer a few times to get the shale off, put it back on with one of these behind the bolts, and call it good. Or maybe they don't bother cleaning it at all, they just whip it off, stick this behind the bolts and put it back together. I don't know. But if your spindle flange is not clean and the axle flange isn't clean and you mount those perfectly parallel, then your wheel alignment is off. If you wanted to do a camber adjustment, for example, you could put a spacer under the bottom bolts and that would tip the bottom of your wheel out a little bit. I don't want any of that. I want it exactly as it was before. And what I did on the other side and what I will try to do on this side is I did not disturb the spindle from the axle. What you do is chisel away as much of the shale as you can first before you touch anything. Try not to damage the ABS sensor. You'll be replacing that shortly after. And then you take out one at a time. You take out one bolt, you clean the threads on the bolt and the threads in the hole, chisel away as much more as you can, put some form of lubrication, we just use anti-seize, put that bolt back in and torque it. Go around, do that with all the bolts, one at a time. Do not take them all out at once until the very end. Take it out, clean, put it back in, torque it. Do that with all four. And then once you're happy with the surface where this shield is going to lay, needs to be fairly flat, then last thing is to carefully loosen and take all four bolts out without bumping the spindle. And then I put a layer of anti-seize on the back of this before I put the other one on. Hold it up there, put your bolts back in, snug them up together, and then I think I did maybe halfway first. They're 44 foot-pounds, I believe. For the spindle bolts, we'll confirm that. Get your splash shield on there, get the bolts snugged up, torque them, and that part's done. And then, so once we get that part done, then we'll quickly talk about putting the new bearing on, and then we'll do it. So I did a thing.
What we didn't want to do? You're too close. Just stay there.
We've never had this ABS sensor out before, I guess. The other side, the screw undid, no problem, because that's the one we replaced when I first put the car on the road. And I was hoping this one was going to crack loose, just so that if I have to do this sensor in the future, because it was giving some trouble, that I would be able to get the screw out. But you know how it goes. So we're just going to pretend that didn't happen. And then when I have to do a sensor, I'll just smash the sensor out of the way, and then we can heat the hub and hopefully get the rest of this out. Or drill and tap it, whatever comes first. But anyway, on to, or back to, installing that, yeah. So voila, splash shield is on. I don't think the spindle moved. That's as much as we can do. So now it's time to actually put the new bearing on. Mitchell insists on doing an unboxing video of something that's really not that exciting to come out of a box. We have this nice fancy schmancy.
Right there, I'm going to zoom in on it and give it a close up. Keep it right there.
Fancy schmancy as I get eaten by mosquitoes. Fancy schmancy wheel bearing hub thingy. That is a technical term, yes. So, as far as installation goes, there are proper installation tools. We do not have such a tool. I will make one at some point when I have nothing better to do. But what the proper tool is supposed to do, go away mosquitoes, is it's basically an axle nut, but it has a long sleeve ahead of that so that it can reach through the bearing and start to thread on. and then it's got a shoulder that will push on the inner race, which is what you have to actually push on to push the bearing on far enough that you can then take that off, put the axle nut back on, and the axle nut will pull it in the rest of the way. What I did on the other side was I just held it up. Actually, I was able to start it, like a quarter of an inch almost, just by hand. And then I took the 30 mil axle socket and a hammer, and I just tried to hold everything as square as I could and whacked it a few times. And you gotta get right down and look in onto the shaft and push the bearing back so that it's got tension on the races, and see if you're straight. If you're not straight and you push it a little bit crooked, I think I mentioned this before maybe, but if you get a little bit crooked, it won't go any further on, and if you try to take it off, there's a risk of ripping that inner race out, and then you got to go get another new bearing. So we're going to try not to do that. I got to clean the shaft there still, and then we'll line it all up, hopefully get it started. And I was able to, on the other side, just hit it with the socket and the hammer down far enough that I could get at least 1 to 2 full threads of the axle nut started, and then I just used the ratchet, pulled it all the way in. And then the torque for these ones is 129 foot-pounds, just straight out, no additional turns. The book says always replace the nut, but nobody replaces the rear nut. It's not necessary. When we do front bearings, absolutely new nylock nut, new snap ring, etc. These ones are much more simple, other than you destroy your bearing if you have to take it off, which is why anytime you're doing a bearing, it's smart to do the splash shield like we've done. And we failed on the ABS sensor bolt front, but that's okay. We'll deal with that another time. So let's put this new bearing on. I just forgot to mention when we were talking a few minutes ago there, I also put a thin film of multi-purpose grease on the clean shaft before you try and put the bearing on. Just makes it slide more easily. I just have extreme pressure Molly from Canadian Tire, just Motomaster, but you can use pretty much any multi-purpose grease. Low temp is fine too. It's just so you're not trying to put what is potentially a dry, this one's not dry, but a dry hub surface onto a dry shaft doesn't work as well. So just a thin film of multi-purpose grease, and then, as I said before, we'll try and get this bearing put on. So voila, nice shiny new bearing hub. You can hear the nice grease sounds. And it's stiff but smooth and quiet, like it should be. This one gave me a little more trouble pulling the bearing in than the other side did, but it still ended up being okay, and it torqued up okay. I think there was something off on this one from the start, because I was able to pull the old bearing off by hand, but nothing we can do about that now. Everything appears to be okay. So I think that pretty much wraps up. Oh, forgot about the cap. There's not much to this. On the other side, I just cleaned it up a little bit, got the old anti-seize and kind of shaved some of the rust off of it, wire brushed the front. And then for those that remember them or have a vehicle that has them, the cars that have drum brakes on the back, the older ones, have a little like domed version of this that covers the spindle and the nut and the cotter pin and everything, and keeps the grease from leaking out. This is basically the same principle. You want to start it straight and gently tap around, or tap in one place and rotate the hub to try and take it down just as evenly as I took it out before, because again, if you twist it sideways and bend it, then number one, it's not going to seal and keep dirt and water out of there, and it might fall out too if you have rims with no center cap to keep it in there. So I won't explain while I'm doing this, but I'm just going to clean it up same as I did the other side, put it in there, take it down evenly, make sure it's bottomed, and that finishes the bearing part of it. And then after that, we're just going to put the rest of this side together. I guess we can quickly show the new rotor here, or rotors. That's this one. So these full set of rotors and pads and clips and whatever, Max Brakes, which is a website that you can order from. I think it was Canadian price, and shipping was free. It was like $250 Canadian for 4 rotors, 4 sets of pads, and the anti-rattle clips and whatever that come with the pads. I'll open up one of these just to show. It looks like this car normally is ventilated rotors on the front and solid rotors on the rear. This is there. So this is just a solid rotor that then has the drilling and slotting machining in it for ventilation purposes. I've never tried this brand before, so I wanted to try it out, mainly because it's way cheaper than other rotors that I bought in the past. So generally that means they won't last as long, so I want to see that much and also see what the difference in performance is with the drilled and slotted part as well. So yeah, we're going to put this other one on. The other side, Mitchell can maybe show at some point, is all complete. Just has to have the parking brake cables balanced and the pistons pushed out like we did in the previous servicing video. The cable?
Check the parking cable again.
That's okay, yeah. I guess we didn't show it on the other side because we didn't film anything, but the parking brake cables are getting pretty rough on this. They've got a vinyl coating that's supposed to keep the water and salt out of the metal accordion that is the casing for the cable. The vinyl coating is disappearing on most of the back half of the cables, so that's when they start to get stiff inside the casing and could seize up, and then you go to release your parking brake and it didn't actually release. So I checked the other side already, it's still okay, but it's gonna have to be replaced soon. If this one's still okay, then we'll leave it as is, and I'll do another little video another time on replacing those cables. It's not too bad, but we'll talk about that another time. I can show one of the fronts is what I was gonna do as well here, because they are a little bit different than the rears. Oh, and heavier too. So, same thing. These are the ventilated ones as per normal, and it's just the same as the back, drilled and slotted, and it's got this nice black coating on there. The braking surface obviously will wear off when we do the braking procedure, which is just like 30 or 50 kilometers an hour and feather braking to a stop. You can search those kind of braking procedures online. I think Max Brake's website actually has the procedure written on their website, how do you do that. But the coating on the rest of the surfaces will stay there and protect the metal for much longer than just a plain steel, or perhaps like zinc coated rotor, for example. So yeah, I think that's gonna pretty much do it for the bearing. We're just gonna whip through putting the brakes back together on this side. Okay, so that's gonna pretty much wrap it up for this week's video. Both rear wheel bearings replaced, and our nice fancy drilled and slotted rotors and new pads are installed. So that's about it. If you like this video, make sure you like and comment if you have a question or something to add or something you'd like to see. either on this car or one of the other cars. Subscribe if you haven't already to the YouTube channel, and hit the bell so that you know when we post new videos like this one and other projects as they come out. Check out the website, GB Productions, I should speak slower, gbproductions.ca. It's in the same state it was a while ago. It needs to be updated, but we're both busy. We'll get there, but you can check that out for some of the early articles. Follow the Instagram page. Yeah, we'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace.
Peace.